My name is Jacqueline Hart, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought a single night a celebration meant to honor our family's legacy could shatter everything I held dear. At the 50th anniversary party for our family's restaurant Hart's Table in Los Angeles, the clink of glasses and warm laughter filled the air. Then my younger brother stormed the stage, his face twisted with rage. He pointed at me, his voice booming through the crowd of 150 guests. "I'm the one who deserves to run this place." Before I could respond, his hand cracked across my cheek, the sharp sting silencing the room. My parents standing nearby nodded in agreement, their betrayal cutting deeper than the slap. I forced a cold smile, my eyes locked on his. "You sure you want to say that?" In front of them, I asked, my voice steady. 2 minutes later, a judge rose from the crowd, his presence shifting the entire night. What happened next turned our family upside down, exposing secrets that would unravel everything. How did one moment, a single act of defiance, ignite a chain of events that changed our lives forever? Stick around to find out. Don't miss the truth behind that night. Hit subscribe and ring the bell to uncover why one slap sparked a reckoning that shook our family to its core. 6 months before the anniversary party, Nolan strode into my office with a smug grin. "I'm Jacqueline Hart, 32 years old, and I've poured my heart into Hart's Table, our family's restaurant in Los Angeles. For 50 years, this place has been a cornerstone of our legacy built by my grandpa, Henry Hart. He entrusted me with it, not my dad, not my younger brother, because I'd proven I could carry his vision forward. I'd spent years streamlining operations, curating menus, and earning the loyalty of our staff and customers. Nolan, my 28-year-old brother, never saw it that way. To him, I'd stolen his birthright. His jealousy wasn't new. It simmered in every glance, every barbed comment since Grandpa named me manager 3 years ago. Nolan leaned against my desk, his designer jacket clashing with the modest wood. "I need Hart's Table for a private event," he said, his tone more demand than request. "My wife's launching her new brand." His wife, an influencer with a knack for turning meals into Instagram fame, wanted to use our restaurant as a backdrop for her latest campaign. I glanced at the calendar, already packed with bookings for our 50th anniversary preparations. "We're fully booked for months," I told him, keeping my voice even. "This isn't a prop for your wife's photo shoots." His grin faded, replaced by a scowl. "You're just scared I'll outshine you," he snapped. "This place could use some real attention." I bit back a retort, remembering the countless nights I'd spent balancing budgets while Nolan partied. His lifestyle, flashy cars, late-night clubs never earned Grandpa's respect. Dad Mark had stepped back from the business years ago, content to let Mom Pamela call the shots at home. And Mom, she always took Nolan's side no matter how reckless he was. "You're being selfish?" Jacqueline, she'd told me over dinner the week before, her voice sharp. "Nolan's trying to help the family name." Dad just nodded, avoiding my eyes as if staying silent absolved him. I stood my ground. "The restaurant's not available," I said firmly. Nolan laughed, a cold edge to it. "You'll regret this," he muttered, storming out. I stared at the door, my chest tight. He'd always resented me, but this felt different, more calculated. I pushed the thought aside and focused on the anniversary plans, determined to honor Grandpa's legacy. Hart's Table wasn't just a business. It was a promise to every customer who'd walked through our doors for 5 decades. That evening, I called Grandpa. At 78, Henry Hart still had a fire in his voice that steadied me. "You're doing right by the restaurant," he said, his words warm but firm. "Your dad never had the spine to lead. And Nolan, he's got no vision. He'd sell this place for a quick buck." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Grandpa had built Hart's Table from nothing, starting with a single stove and a dream. He'd chosen me because I understood that weight, that responsibility. "Don't let them push you around," he added. "This is your fight now." His words echoed as I hung up. I thought about Mom's favoritism, how she'd always excused Nolan's mistakes, from crashing Dad's car to blowing thousands on failed ventures. Dad's silence only made it worse, letting Mom's bias fester. Nolan's demand wasn't just about a party, it was a challenge to my place to Grandpa's trust. I pulled up our event schedule again, double-checking every detail for the anniversary. If Nolan wanted to play games, I'd be ready. The next day, I overheard Nolan on the phone outside the restaurant, his voice low but clear. "Yeah, it's a done deal," he said. "We'll have the place for the event." My stomach twisted. He wasn't asking, he was planning to take. I walked back to my office, my mind racing. Nolan's entitlement wasn't new, but his boldness was. I thought of Grandpa's warning, his belief in me. Whatever Nolan was scheming, I wouldn't let him unravel everything we'd built. The anniversary was 6 months away, and I'd make sure Hart's table shone without his interference. 3 months later, as the anniversary party drew closer, Nolan started crossing lines. I'd been working tirelessly to make Hart's Table's 50th anniversary a tribute to my grandpa's legacy, planning every detail to honor the restaurant's history. But Nolan had other ideas. He and Stacy turned the event into their personal stage. I walked into the restaurant one morning to find a stack of glossy flyers on the counter plastered with Stacy's face, and the words, "Nolan Hart presents a new era for Hart's Table." They'd invited a slew of influencers and investors, pitching the party as a launch for their own brand. My jaw tightened as I read the fine print. Nolan was listed as the host, as if he ran the place. I confronted him in the dining room where he was directing staff to rearrange tables for his vision. "This is Grandpa's anniversary," I said, my voice sharp. "It's about Hart's Table, not your side hustle." Nolan smirked, tossing a flyer at me. "You're stuck in the past, Jacqueline. I'm making this place relevant." Stacy chimed in, her phone already recording for her followers. "We're bringing in people who matter," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I wanted to rip the flyer in half, but I held back, knowing a scene would only fuel their narrative. That night, I called Mom to get her on board with keeping the party focused on Grandpa's legacy. "Nolan's just trying to elevate the restaurant," she said, her voice defensive. "You should be grateful he's drawing attention." I gripped the phone, stunned. Mom had always excused Nolan's antics, but this felt like a betrayal. Dad, as usual, stayed silent when I brought it up at dinner. "Let's not fight," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. Their refusal to back me up stung, but I wasn't surprised. Mom's favoritism had always blinded her to Nolan's flaws, and Dad's passivity only enabled it. I tried reasoning with Nolan the next day. "Grandpa built this place on hard work, not flash," I said, pointing to the old photos lining the restaurant walls. "This party is for him, not your investors." Nolan laughed, brushing me off. "You're too sentimental," he said. "This is business. People need to see me as the face of Hart's Table." His words hit like a punch. He wasn't just undermining me, he was rewriting our family's story, claiming a role he'd never earned. I walked away, my hands shaking, determined to protect what Grandpa had entrusted to me. Later that week, I visited Grandpa at his house. At 78, he still had a sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude. I told him about Nolan's plans, showing him the flyer. His face darkened as he read it. "Nolan's always been reckless," he said, his voice low. "He's not interested in the restaurant's soul, just its spotlight. You can't let him tarnish what we built." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Grandpa had poured his life into Hart's Table, starting with nothing but a dream and a recipe book. He'd chosen me to carry it forward, and I wouldn't let Nolan's ego destroy that. Grandpa leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "Watch him closely, Jacqueline. He's not just throwing a party, he's making a move. Protect the restaurant." His warning sent a chill through me. I'd suspected Nolan was up to something bigger, but Grandpa's words confirmed it. Back at the restaurant, I noticed Nolan meeting with a group of sharply dressed men in the private dining room. They weren't regular customers, they carried briefcases and spoke in hushed tones about opportunities. Nolan caught my eye and grinned, but it wasn't friendly. It was the look of someone who thought he'd already won. I spent the next few days digging into the guest list Nolan had submitted. Half the names were influencers with no connection to Heart's Table. The other half were investors I'd never heard of. My stomach churned as I realized Nolan was using the anniversary to pitch something beyond a party, something that could threaten the restaurant's future. I called a staff meeting to refocus the team on Grandpa's vision, emphasizing the recipes and stories that made Heart's Table special. But Nolan's flyers kept appearing, and his updates to the event kept overriding my plans. Every step felt like a battle to keep the restaurant's heart intact. The anniversary was now weeks away, and Nolan's interference was relentless. I knew I had to act, but I couldn't confront him without proof of what he was really planning. Grandpa's warning echoed in my mind, urging me to stay sharp. The night of Heart's Table's 50th anniversary party, the lights dazzled and 150 guests raised their glasses. I stood at the front of the dining room, my heart swelling with pride. Heart's Table. My grandpa's legacy was being celebrated exactly as I'd envisioned until Nolan grabbed the microphone. His voice sliced through the chatter. "Tonight isn't just about old traditions," he declared, glaring at me. "It's about my vision only I deserve to lead." The crowd stirred their murmurs, sharp and uneasy. My chest tightened. This was my tribute to Grandpa, and Nolan was tearing it apart. He stepped closer, his face twisted with disdain. "Jacqueline's been holding this place back." He sneered, his words carrying across the room. Before I could respond, his hand cracked across my face, the sharp sting silencing the guests. I clenched my fists, giving only a cold smile. "You sure you want to say that in front of them?" I asked, my voice steady despite the burn on my cheek. Nolan smirked, his confidence unshaken. Mom stood up from her table, her voice firm. "Nolan's the one we need," she said, nodding at him. Dad gave a curt nod, his silence deafening. Their support for Nolan landed like a second blow, but I refused to falter. Suddenly, the screen behind me lit up. Grandpa's face appeared, his voice steady and commanding in a video he'd secretly arranged. He'd foreseen Nolan scheming his attempt to seize control and prepared this moment. "Heart's Table is my life's work," he said, his words resonating with conviction. "I chose Jacqueline because she carries its heart, its dedication to quality, to our guests, to our legacy. She's the one I trust to lead." The room fell silent, every guest hanging on his words. Nolan's smirk vanished, his face paling as Grandpa's endorsement exposed his overreach. Mom's expression hardened, and Dad shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Stacy, standing near Nolan, fidgeted, her usual poise crumbling. Exactly 2 minutes later, a man stood from the crowd, Judge David Holt, Grandpa's old friend and my lawyer. He'd been part of Grandpa's plan, ready to act the moment Nolan crossed the line. "That was assault, Nolan," he said, his voice cutting through the tension with authority. "You don't claim leadership by attacking someone in front of 150 witnesses." Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding in agreement. Nolan tried to laugh it off, his voice shaky. "It's just a family disagreement," he said, but the words fell flat. Judge Holt's eyes narrowed. "You'll face legal consequences for this," he declared, his tone leaving no room for debate. The celebration unraveled into chaos. Security approached the stage, their presence firm. Mom's voice rose in defense. "This is being misunderstood," she insisted, but the crowd's murmurs drowned her out. Dad stood silent, his face etched with unease. Stacy tugged at Nolan's arm, urging him to step back, but he brushed her off, his eyes darting nervously. I stood my ground, Grandpa's words echoing in my mind, fueling my resolve. This wasn't just about me, it was about protecting Heart's Table from Nolan's reckless ambition. Judge Holt approached me as the room buzzed with tension. "We'll handle this properly," he said quietly, his expression resolute. I nodded, my thoughts racing. Nolan's public stunt wasn't just an outburst, it was a calculated move to undermine me, but Grandpa had anticipated it. His video, paired with Judge Holt's intervention, had turned Nolan's plan against him. The night I'd planned to honor our legacy had become a battleground, exposing the fractures in our family that could no longer be ignored. I walked off the stage, my steps steady despite the turmoil. The party was over, but the real fight was just beginning. I left the party and stepped into the empty kitchen of Hart's table. The hum of the refrigerators replaced the chaos of the dining room, but my mind still churned with the sting of betrayal. Nolan's slap at the anniversary party had been humiliating, but Mom and Dad's support for him hurt worse. They'd dismissed my grandpa's trust in me, siding with Nolan's brazen grab for control. I gripped the edge of a steel counter, my knuckles whitening as I recalled the crowd's stunned silence, Grandpa's voice defending me on the screen, Judge Holt's sharp rebuke. Hart's table was my grandpa's legacy, and I'd poured my heart into protecting it. Nolan's actions felt like a knife in that legacy, but I wouldn't let him destroy it. Brian, the restaurant manager, slipped into the kitchen, his face drawn. He'd been a loyal part of Hart's table for years, always upholding Grandpa's vision. "Jacqueline, we've got a problem," he said, his voice hushed. He checked the door to ensure no one followed. "I caught Nolan on a call last week talking to investors about selling a stake in the restaurant. He's been using old legal documents, ones Grandpa gave him access to years ago when he still trusted him to pitch the deal as his own." My heart sank. Grandpa was the sole owner of Hart's table, his name on every contract, every deed. Nolan had no right to negotiate a sale, but those documents gave him just enough leverage to deceive investors into thinking he had authority. "He's claiming he's the future of this place," Brian added, his eyes narrowing. "Says you're too focused on tradition to lead." My breath caught anger mixing with disbelief. Nolan's stunt at the party, declaring himself the leader, wasn't just arrogance. It was a calculated step in a scheme to steal control by selling off a piece of Hart's table. Those documents, which Grandpa had shared when Nolan was still in his good graces, were now a weapon in his hands. "Do you know where the proof is?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. Brian nodded. "His laptop's in the office. I saw emails when he left it open yesterday. They're still there unless he's deleted them." I clenched my jaw, the weight of his words settling in. Nolan wasn't just undermining me, he was betraying Grandpa's trust, twisting legal access into a tool for his own gain. That night, I called Grandpa, my hands steadying as his familiar voice answered. "Nolan's trying to sell a stake in Hart's table," I said, laying out Brian's revelation. "He's using your old legal documents to convince investors he's in charge." Grandpa's silence was heavy, his anger palpable even over the phone. "He's always been a schemer," he said finally, his voice low and firm. "Hart's table is my life's work, Jacqueline. I chose you to protect it because you understand its soul. Don't let him sell what we built." His words reignited my resolve. "I'll stop him," I promised, my voice unwavering. "Find the evidence," Grandpa urged. "Expose him before he goes further." His encouragement fueled me. Hart's table wasn't just a business, it was decades of my grandpa's sweat, recipes perfected over late nights, and guests who'd become family. Nolan's plan to sell it off was a betrayal of everything we stood for. I hung up my mindset on action. If Nolan thought he could outsmart us, he'd miscalculated. Before dawn, I crept into the office, heart pounding. Nolan's laptop sat on the desk left behind in his haste after the party. I opened it, holding my breath as the screen flickered on. His email was still accessible, and there they were, messages to investors detailing a deal to sell a 40% stake in Hart's table. He'd attached scanned copies of Grandpa's legal documents, presenting himself as the rightful negotiator. Each email painted me as unfit, claiming he'd modernize the restaurant. My stomach twisted, but I forwarded the messages to my account and printed copies for Judge Holt, my lawyer. Every line I read sharpened my focus. Nolan's lies wouldn't stand. I met Brian that afternoon, showing him the printed emails. "This is a start," he said, scanning the pages. "But we need more contracts, meeting notes, anything to nail him." I nodded, already mapping out my next moves. I'd check Nolan's calendar, track his meetings, and dig for any documents he'd hidden. Hart's table was my grandpa's dream, and I'd fight to keep it ours. Nolan's scheme was unraveling, and I was ready to bring it down. As I locked the office door, my determination burned brighter. Nolan's betrayal had gone too far, but I was prepared to fight back. 1 month later, I received an email from an investor asking about the restaurant's shares. The message from a venture capitalist named Ellen Carter referenced a binding contract signed by Nolan offering a 35% stake in Hart's Table. My stomach churned as I read her words. Grandpa was the sole owner, his authority unquestioned in every legal document. Nolan's claim was a lie built on the forged papers Brian had warned me about. His scheme to sell the restaurant wasn't just a betrayal, it was outright fraud. I called Brian to the back office, my hands steady despite my anger. Carter's email mentions a contract from Nolan, I said, showing him the screen. Brian's jaw tightened. I found something in the storage room, he said, producing a stack of papers. They were counterfeit contracts stamped with a forged version of Grandpa's signature naming Nolan as the authorized representative. The documents were riddled with errors, misspelled terms, mismatched dates, but convincing enough to fool an unsuspecting investor. He printed these last week, Brian said, his voice low. I caught him sneaking them out of the office. Nolan's arrogance had made him sloppy, and I intended to use it against him. I forwarded Carter's email to Judge Holt, my lawyer, along with scans of the forged contracts. This is serious, he said over the phone, his tone sharp. We need to identify every investor he's approached and build a case. Together, Brian and I dug deeper, accessing Nolan's email account through a shared restaurant server he'd neglected to lock. We uncovered messages to 4 investors, each sent a version of the fake contract promising stakes in Hart's Table for millions. Nolan's emails painted him as the restaurant's savior, dismissing my leadership as stagnant. Each lie I read sharpened my focus. He thought he could steal Grandpa's legacy, but I was ready to fight back. A letter from Grandpa arrived that afternoon, his handwriting bold and clear. Jacqueline, it began. Hart's Table is yours to protect. Nolan's deceit can't undo our work. Show the world who you are. His words were a spark igniting my determination. I tucked the letter into my pocket, its weight grounding me. Grandpa had trusted me to carry his dream, and I wouldn't let him down. With Brian and Judge Holt, I mapped out a strategy to expose Nolan at the Los Angeles Food Conference, a major event where he'd likely pitch his fraudulent deals to a wider audience. Brian confirmed Nolan's attendance, having overheard him boasting about a game-changing presentation. We compiled a dossier, forged contracts, email correspondences, and a detailed timeline of Nolan's investor meetings, all cross-checked by Judge Holt for accuracy. I planned to distribute the evidence to key attendees, ensuring Nolan's lies would collapse in front of the industry. My heart pounded at the thought of confronting him, but I felt a quiet strength. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice for Hart's Table. As I reviewed the dossier, I pictured Nolan's smug grin fading. Hart's Table was my family's heart, and I'd make sure it stayed ours. The night of the Los Angeles Food Conference, the stage lights illuminated the auditorium. I stood in the wings, gripping a USB drive loaded with evidence of Nolan's lies. The room hummed with anticipation, packed with chefs, investors, and journalists, all drawn to Nolan's promised reveal. He took the stage, his posture brimming with confidence. Hart's Table is poised for greatness, he declared, unveiling a plan for a nationwide chain under his leadership. With new investors, we'll transform dining. His words were smooth, but I saw the cracks in his facade. Tonight, I'd shatter it. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through his applause. Nolan's plan is built on lies, I said, plugging the USB into the projector. The screen lit up with scans of his forged contracts, Grandpa's signature crudely faked. Murmurs swept the crowd as I displayed his emails to investors, including Ellen Carter promising stakes he couldn't sell. These documents are fake, I said, my tone steady. Nolan has no authority over Hart's Table. My grandpa owns it, and I'm its leader. The room grew tense, eyes darting between me and Nolan. His smile faltered, his hands clenching. I held up Grandpa's letter, its words, my anchor. Heart's table is my legacy, I read aloud, my voice ringing clear. Jacqueline carries it forward. No one else has that right. The crowd leaned in the weight of Grandpa's words, silencing their doubts. I pointed to the screen. Nolan forged these contracts to steal our family's restaurant. He's betrayed us all. Gasps erupted as investors scanned the evidence, their faces darkening. Carter stood, her voice sharp. "We're done here," she said, tearing up her copy of Nolan's contract. Others followed, their trust in him collapsing. Nolan's voice cracked as he tried to recover. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, but the crowd ignored him. Stacy, standing near the stage, glared at him. "You used me," she said, her voice cold. She turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply as she left Nolan behind. The audience whispered, cameras flashing as his downfall unfolded. Mom and Dad, seated near the front, sat frozen, their eyes wide with shock. Mom's hand covered her mouth while Dad stared at the floor, their earlier faith in Nolan now a bitter mistake. I met their gaze, unflinching. This moment was mine. I faced the crowd, my resolve unshaken. "Heart's table belongs to my family," I said. "I'll protect its legacy no matter what." Cheers broke out, some attendees standing in support. The event organizer stepped in, motioning for Nolan to leave. He hesitated, his face flushed with defeat, then slunk off the stage, security trailing him. The investors discarded his contracts, their whispers turning to plans for new partnerships with me. Stacy was gone, her alliance with Nolan severed. Mom and Dad remained silent, their regret palpable but unspoken. As I left the stage, Judge Holt approached, his expression approving. "You've taken control," he said. "The restaurant is yours." I nodded, my heart swelling with pride. Nolan's lies had been exposed, and Heart's table was safe. I'd fought for Grandpa's dream, and won. 8 months later, Heart's table was still thriving, but my family had fallen apart. Nolan's downfall at the Los Angeles Food Conference had sealed his fate. Judge Holt had filed fraud charges against him, and the industry had turned its back. He'd fled Los Angeles, his name now synonymous with deceit. I'd cut him off completely. No calls, no messages, no chance for excuses. Heart's table was my responsibility, and I'd drawn a line to protect it. I met Pamela and Mark at a quiet cafe, their request for a meeting breaking months of silence. Mom's eyes were tired, her voice soft. "We trusted Nolan too much," she admitted, her hands twisting a napkin. "We should have seen his lies." Dad nodded, his face heavy with regret. "You were right, Jacqueline," he said. "We failed you." Their words were sincere, but the sting of their betrayal lingered. I'd spent years building trust only to watch them side with Nolan. "I need time," I said, my tone firm. "Heart's table comes first now." They looked at each other, their silence heavy, and left without protest. I didn't know if we'd ever rebuild, but I'd learned to guard my boundaries. Grandpa called that evening, his voice warm with pride. "You've done more than I ever dreamed," he said. "Heart's table is stronger because of you." His words steadied me, a reminder of the legacy I carried. I shared my plans to expand the restaurant, and he chuckled. "Keep it true to our roots," he urged. I promised I would, my heart full. Grandpa's faith had carried me through the storm, and his pride was my anchor. Back at Heart's table, I poured my energy into growth. We opened a second location downtown, its design echoing Grandpa's original vision: warm wood, soft lighting, and his classic recipes. The staff rallied behind me, their loyalty unwavering after Nolan's betrayal. Brian, ever reliable, managed the new site, ensuring every detail honored our legacy. The expansion drew new guests, their praise spreading Heart's table's name further. I felt a quiet triumph, knowing we'd rebuilt stronger than before. Inspired by the fight to protect our legacy, I started a small foundation in Grandpa's name. It offered scholarships for aspiring chefs and financial aid for restaurant workers facing hardship. I'd seen too many in our industry struggle, and I wanted to give back. The foundation's first grant went to a young cook who reminded me of myself, determined, but in need of a chance. We also launched a community cooking program, teaching locals the recipes Grandpa had perfected. Each class ended with a lesson I'd learned the hard way: set boundaries, protect what matters. The students nodded, their eyes bright with understanding, and I felt a spark of hope. Hart's Table wasn't just a restaurant, it was a beacon for resilience. One evening, I stood in the original dining room, now bustling with guests. A framed photo of Grandpa hung on the wall, his smile watching over us. I'd heard whispers that Nolan was working odd jobs out of state, his reputation in ruins. Stacy had vanished from the industry, her social media dark since she'd walked away from him. Carter, the investor Nolan had deceived, sent a note congratulating our expansion, hinting at future partnerships. The past still ached, but I'd found my strength in letting go. Mom and Dad sent occasional messages, but I kept my distance, choosing Hart's Table over a fractured family. As I locked the restaurant that night, I paused at the door. Hart's Table stood as a testament to what I'd fought for: a legacy of love, resilience, and boundaries. I'd lost a family, but I'd gained a purpose. The future was mine to shape.